George French, Madison Lightfoot have paid Sleepy Polly and Daddy Walker, who are the black wagon transporters in Detroit, they pull up with their wagon and take Thornton out to take him to the river, and he's placed on a boat. He crosses over into Canada, eventually reunites with his wife, Rutha Blackburn. The mayor of Detroit, Mayor Chapin, petitioned that they be sent back to Detroit to be in slavery. Or, well, actually he petitioned that they be sent back because they incited a riot. And Canada debates this in their court system. And basically Canada comes up with a precedent that they will never extradite a suspect or an alleged criminal who will be facing a sentence, a punishment higher than what they could ever get in Canada. And since Canada doesn't have slavery, if they were sent back to Detroit because they incited a riot, they would end up back in slavery. And since Canada doesn't have slavery, Canada refuses to send them back. To this day, that precedent still exists in Canada. It's mainly used now for the death penalty. So criminals who escape to Canada, if they're facing the death penalty in some other country, mainly United States, Canada will not send them back. What happens generally in the United States is that jurisdiction, whether it's New York or Maine or whatever state that had or has a death penalty, they'll take the death penalty off the table, and then Canada will send the suspect back to America. But that precedent begins with the Thornton and Rutha Blackburn incident here in Detroit, which was the Black Uprising. Some people call that a race riot. It was not a race riot. It was a black uprising to free these two black people from slavery. They weren't trying to go out and kill all the white people. They were trying to rescue these two black people. A race riot is when you're targeting white people or white people targeting black people for attack. This did not happen. There was an uprising, a rebellion. So so Thornton and Rutha would end up in Toronto. They would live in Toronto for a little while. Toronto is not yet the big city it is now. But it's becoming a growing town. And Thornton and Rutha realized that there's no real transportation system in Toronto. And they create the first taxi cab company in Toronto. And they become wealthy landowners in Toronto. And come back to Detroit and to Kentucky to free their family, help their family escape from slavery 5 years later, and bring them to Toronto. Now, when they unearthed their home in Toronto, they found implements, really simple plates and simple silverware. And they were like, as rich as they were, they didn't live like rich people. But it was later discovered that they owned 6 other homes in Toronto. And they would use those 6 other homes for other black people who had escaped from slavery and made it to Toronto, so they would have a refuge when they made it to Toronto. So instead of their money being spent to live lavishly, as wealthy as they became, they used their money and poured it right back into the abolitionist and Underground Railroad movement that has saved them. There is a marker in Kentucky that tells this whole story, including the uprising and rebellion that happened here in Detroit. In Toronto, there are a number of markers talking about their history, but they also talk about what happened here in Detroit. And here we stand at the spot where it occurred in Detroit, and there's no marker here. There's nothing that tells this history. Because what would happen after this occurred, the mayor would put 300 black people in jail, force a number of other black people to clean up the city because of this so-called riot. Of course, the Detroit Free Press, which was a new paper, was attacking black people as they began to do. And a curfew was instituted. The first curfew in Detroit was instituted as a response to what this uprising, this rebellion. So when we talk about the uprising in Ferguson, Missouri right now, this is standard procedure that they instituted a curfew. The curfew in Detroit in 1833 was 9 p.m. What also was instituted was a new entity called the Detroit Police Department. The Detroit Police Department was created as a response to this black uprising, and their job was not to protect this community and serve the citizens and stop crime. Their job was to keep another black uprising, patrol the black community, and keep them from being another black rebellion. So the tension in Detroit between the black community and the police department didn't begin in 1967. It didn't begin with stress. It began at the very outset, the very creation of the Detroit Police Department, because its very creation was to put down any sense of unity and freedom with freedom fighting within the burgeoning black community. Now that was the response of the authorities. What was the response of the black community? The black community realized that they came together for this event, for this particular incident, and that they needed to be more intentional in their coming together. So the people who organized the rescue of Thornton and Ruth of Blackburn met at George French's house. You know, Caroline was the woman who switched clothes. His wife, Caroline, was the woman who switched clothes with Ruth. They started in George French's house, the Second Baptist Church. The Second Baptist Church would become, of course, a religious institution, a foundational religious institution in Detroit, becoming the first black-led church in Detroit, in Michigan, and possibly the first black-led institution in the whole Midwest. The first black school would take place in the basement of Second Baptist Church. The Second Baptist Church would become a center, almost like a headquarters of the Underground Railroad and abolitionist movement in Detroit. It would also become the first black bank for black entrepreneurs, because white banks didn't loan to black businesses. So if you had to get a loan, you had to either get it from somebody in your family or sometimes an illegal source, or you went to Second Baptist Church. So Second Baptist Church becomes a foundation for what would later become Paradise Valley, because many of those early businesses in Paradise Valley would get some or part of their seed money from Second Baptist Church, or from some of the business people who attended Second Baptist Church. So Second Baptist Church becomes a anchor for the black community. And so now we see a true black community being forged, where this cooperative living, this cooperative form of developing begins in the black community, and it begins around the fight for freedom. So this radical history for Detroit is become cemented at this spot in 1833, which later we talked earlier about in 1833, the Thornton and Ruth of Blackburn incident. 3 years later, the organizers of that rebellion, that uprising that freed Thornton and Ruth of Blackburn, founded a church called Second Baptist Church. And the idea, when you see Second Baptist, you know, that tells you something. You immediately know that there was a First Baptist. You know, so because if you got a Second Baptist, it had to be a First Baptist. And there kind of is a Second Baptist movement in many cities that has a significant black population. If you go there to this day, you're going to find a Second Baptist church. And almost all those Second Baptist churches are going to be black churches. Well, what happened? Why we have all these Second Baptist churches in black cities, or cities with significant black populations, and we don't have many First Baptist churches? Well, that First Baptist, in most of those cases, was a white church, and it was racist. And so black people who were Baptists didn't want to be a part of the racist church, so they set up Second Baptist churches. So you go to many cities and you find Second Baptist church, almost all of them would be black churches. Same here. Although this would be the first black-led congregation in Michigan, and possibly the first black-led congregation in the whole Midwest. So I already told you it becomes the anchor for creating and developing what became the black community in Detroit. Second Baptist is the headquarters of the Underground Railroad movement. It is the beginning of the black school. The first black school is established here. The first economic institution that lended to black entrepreneurs was Second Baptist Church. And it becomes the springboard for black political development. So your first black politicians come out of Second Baptist Church. So this becomes an anchor for creating the black community. Second Baptist, like I said, in other cities you find Second Baptists and they're all, for the most part, tend to be black churches, except in Montgomery, Alabama. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Baptist church was racist. The First Baptist church was racist. Black people did say we don't want to be a part of this racist church, and they left First Baptist Church, but they did not go and found Second Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. In Montgomery Church, they started another First Baptist Church. So in Montgomery, you had two First Baptist churches. You had First Baptist Church and First Baptist Church Colored. So they didn't do the Second Baptist like a lot of other cities did. They had a First Baptist Colored. So now you got two First Baptists, First Baptist and First Baptist Colored. First Baptist Colored, of course, was tied to the period of enslavement, the period of slavery. And so, as time went on, some of what some people call uppity blacks didn't want to be attached to slavery. So they left First Baptist Church and started a church down the street, the church down the street they founded was basically a stone's throw from the state capitol in Montgomery. And the church is on Dexter Avenue, so they named it Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Dexter Avenue Baptist Church did not did not sing Negro spiritual. Go down Moses, swing low sweet chariot, wade in the water. They didn't sing those songs because they considered those songs to be slave songs. And they were too dignified to attach themselves to anything involving slavery. So they sung the more European hymns, the ones with the high notes, you know, the more opera sounding songs. That's the hymns they chose to sing at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. The people in Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, they thought they were better than the people who attended First Baptist Church Colored. You know, they like, we better than them. We're business people. We're bankers. If they said they was a banker, they was probably a teller at a bank. We're business people. They probably were the secretary of a business person. But they thought they were better because they weren't sharecropping or they weren't manual labor, so they thought they were better. And some of them had an education, some of them were teachers. You know, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was strongly associated, strongly connected to Alabama State College at that time. It's now Alabama State University.
Middle class.
So they considered themselves to be the middle class. Unlike most black churches, including First Baptist Colored, they were not run by the minister. They were run by a deacon's board. So the deacon's board hired and fired preachers. And by the time they get to the 1940s, they are looking for the best preacher, best black preacher. And at that time, it was kind of agreed that the top three best black preachers were Mordecai Johnson, Howard Thurman, and Vernon Johns. They ended up settling on Vernon Johns. And Vernon Johns becomes the minister of the church. Vernon Johns, highly intelligent, highly educated. He went to apply to Harvard, and he didn't get in. He didn't get into Harvard. The registrar said, "We're not letting you in Harvard. We're not letting you get in Harvard. You didn't graduate from high school. You didn't, graduate." So Vernon Johns tells the registrar to get a book off of his library, his personal library that's inside of the registrar's office. It's in Latin. So the registrar gets the book, written in Latin, and Vernon Johns reads the whole book in Latin.